Hi everyone, this video is on factoring perfect square trinomials. A square root is one of two equal factors of an expression. The symbol that directs us to find the square root looks like this. It's kind of like a division symbol. It's kind of have that check mark at the end. Anyways, here's some perfect squares. A perfect square is a number like 36. And the square root, well, it's one of two equal factors. It's the number that when multiplied by itself gives you the perfect square. So in this case, the square root is 6. That's because 6 times 6 is 36. A perfect square for another expression, x squared, would be x. That's because x times x equals x squared. 64a squared, that would be 8a, because 8a times 8a is 64a squared. So notice that the square root, if it has a variable, is half of whatever the perfect square was. So in this fourth row, x to the fourth, y to the fourth, the square root would be half of those exponents, x squared, y squared. And if our perfect square is 2b plus 3 squared, the square root would be 2b plus 3, half of what we started. Okay, so those are what square roots are. So in the last lesson, we factored the polynomial 4x squared minus 12x plus 9. The result was 2x minus 3 squared, which is a binomial squared. Any trinomial that factors into a single binomial squared is called a perfect square trinomial. Here are the formulas. A squared plus 2ab plus b squared is equal to a plus b squared. And a squared minus 2ab plus b squared is equal to a minus b squared. Okay, so to use these formulas, the first and last terms must be perfect squares. The middle term must equal twice the product of the square roots of the first and last terms. Okay, let's do some examples. Make sure you have those notes written down. So we did this problem in the last video, but we're going to do it differently this time. First, we're going to find the square roots of the first and last terms. So this method is only for specific trinomials. You have to recognize that the first term and the last term are perfect squares, which they are. Right? So what's the square root of the first term? That would be 2x. I'm going to label them as a and b here, just to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to, but it might make it easier. How about our b? What's the square root of the last term? The last term is 9. The square root of 9 would be 3. Okay, our next step. The middle term must equal twice the product of a and b. Twice. That means 2 times. So let's multiply a times b and multiply that by 2. So 2 times a times b, what does that equal to? 2 times 2x times 3. That equals 12x. Is that our middle term? Yes. Yes, it is. So that means we could use this formula. Well, which formula? There's two formulas. There's one with the plus for the middle term, and there's one for a minus for the middle term. Which row are we going to use, the top row or the bottom row? Right, we're going to use the bottom row. So the bottom row says a minus b squared. Look at the right side of the equal. That's what we're looking at. So we're going to use the bottom row, which is a minus b squared. And our a is 2x and our b is 3, so you just put into the formula, so it's 2x minus 3 squared. Okay, here's our second example. 25x squared plus 70x plus 49. Are the first and last terms perfect squares? Yes, they are. So that's our first step. Find the square roots of the first and last terms. Label them a and b. So what's our a? A is the square root of 25x squared. What's the square root of 25x squared? What times itself is 25x squared? 5x. And what's the square root of 49? 7. Step 2. The middle term must equal twice the product of a and b. So we're going to multiply 2 times a times b. 2 times 5x times 7. What does that equal? 70x, right? Is that our middle term? Yes. That means that we could use the formula. Here's our two formulas. Are we going to use the top row or the bottom row? We're going to use the top row, right? We're going to use the top row since the middle term is positive. So on the right side of that top row, it says a plus b squared. So that's what we're going to write down, a plus b squared. And then replace a with 5x and b with 7, and you're all done. Not too bad, right? Let's try another. Nine x squared minus 24xy plus 16y squared. Are the first and last terms perfect squares? Yes, they are. So we're going to find the square roots of the first and last term. What's the square root of 9x squared? 3x. What's the square root of 16y squared? 4y. Now our second part of the check. The middle term must equal twice the product of a and b. That's 2 times a times b. That's 2 times 3x times 4y. Multiply that, what do we get? That's 24xy. Is that our middle term? Yeah, it sure is, right? So that means we could use our formula. Which row we're going to use, the top row or the bottom row? Right, the bottom row. We're going to use the bottom row since the middle term is negative. So the bottom row says the answer is a minus b squared. So I'm writing down a minus b squared and then replace the a with 3x and the b with 4y. Okay, here's another example. Are the first and last terms perfect squares? Yes, they are. Find the square roots. What's the square root of 9x squared? 3x. What's the square root of 4? 2. Second part of the condition is to multiply 2 times a times b. That's 2 times 3x times 2. What does that equal? 12x. Is that the middle term? No, it's not, right? That means it's not a perfect square trinomial. We cannot use our formulas. So what do? Well, we go back to what we were doing on previous trinomials. We could vector by grouping. Again, there are other methods. Grouping is just one I tend to show most often. All right, so let's do this trinomial. The method is to multiply a times c. Multiply the first number and the last number. That's 36. And then to list all the factors. So what are all the factors of 36? Here they are. 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. Since the last sign is positive, we want to look for the pair that adds to be the middle number. Which of those pairs will add to be 13? Right, the 4 and 9. Now the signs. What signs do the 4 and 9 have to be so that it adds to be negative 13? Yes, both negative. Now we could split the middle term into two terms using those numbers as the coefficients of the variable. 9x squared minus 4x minus 9x plus 4. Factor by grouping. What's the GCF for the first pair? Just x. What's the GCF for the second pair? There's no common factor, so we're going to factor out a 1, but since the first term is negative, it's going to be a negative 1. That'll also give us 9x minus 4. That's good. They match. So then our answer is 9x minus 4 times x minus 1. All right, example 5. This one looks awful, right? Huge numbers. But we got to remember our general steps to factoring. Number 1, is it in descending order? It's not, right? So we're going to arrange it in descending order. Which term should go first? Right, the 20x to the third should go first, the 180x squared should go second, and the 405x will go last. Now our GCF. What is our GCF? It can't be a 10, because 10 doesn't go to 405, or a 20. Probably just the 5, right? Yes, looks like just 5. Oh, and an x. So 5x. Oh, the first term is negative, so it's a negative 5x. Divide each of the terms by negative 5x, the answer goes inside. Okay, so now we have 4x squared minus 36x plus 81. Now we're going to factor that trinomial. All right, looks like a perfect square trinomial. Let's check if we could do that. Otherwise, we have to multiply 4 times 81. That's kind of a lot of work, right? 4 times 81 is 324. That's a lot of work. It's easier to use that formula when we can. All right, find the square roots of the first and last terms. What's the square root of 4x squared? That's right, 2x. What's the square root of 81? 9. Second part, 2 times a times b. 2 times 2x times 9. What does that give us? 36x. Can we use the formula? Yeah, it matches. Here's our formulas. Are we going to use the top row or the bottom row? We're going to use the bottom row because the middle term is negative, right? So that'll be a minus b squared. What's our a? A is 2x. Our b is 9. Is that it? Are we all done? No, we're only done if you want to get points marked off, right? You got to remember to bring down that GCF. So don't forget to bring down that GCF. It's so easy to forget. So there's our answer, negative 5x times, then in parentheses, 2x minus 9 squared. All right, that's the last one. I'll see you here for the next lesson.